This is the Mo Money Podcast with your host, Jessica Morehouse.
Hello and welcome to episode 48 of the Mo Money Podcast. Thank you so much for joining me today for this episode. Just want to preface this episode with the fact that this is episode 48 and I'm going to be taking a break or ending season 2 or whatever after episode 52. I didn't realize this because honestly, when I started this podcast, I didn't really have a schedule in mind. I just kind of thought, let's just see how far I can go. Let's see how many episodes I can kind of crank out. And apparently, when I come to my 1-year anniversary, the first week of June, I'll have put out a new episode every week for a year, which is a bit crazy for me considering I've got a lot of other stuff on the go. I don't do this as a full-time gig. I actually work 9 to 5 at a full-time job. Just saying. So that being said, I've got a few more episodes coming up, some pretty awesome ones. I've got one with my lovely grandma who, because I got a lot of great responses from the episode I did with my grandpa. So I did one with my grandma who moved from Scotland to Canada in the 50s and started a new life here. And I've also got one, which I'm very excited about, with the one and only Gail Bazoxlade. So make sure to check that one out in the coming weeks. And then I, of course, will be ending kind of the season with a solo episode because isn't this funny timing? When it's the 1-year anniversary of this podcast, I'll also be the time that I actually turn 30. So I thought it'd be really cool to do a solo episode to mark that occasion. Also, this is still in the works. I hope to be doing a fabulous contest to give away some prizes to celebrate my 1-year anniversary. So make sure to keep on listening every week for more details about all of that. Now, for this episode, I am interviewing the awesome Jen Hemphill. She is an entrepreneur. She is a money coach. She also has a blog and her own personal finance podcast. So we have a lot of things in common, actually, which is pretty cool. So we're going to be chatting in this episode about her journey, how she got into money coaching. She is married to her husband is in the military, so they move around a lot. So it kind of makes sense that she figured out a way to create her own business that is kind of mobile. So we'll talk about that and just kind of talk about some great personal finance tips that she has for people to kind of take with them and use so they can better manage their money today. So here we go. Thank you, Jen, for joining me on this show. I'm excited to talk to you.
Thank you, Jessica, so much for having me. I'm excited to talk to you just because we seem to be so much alike, at least what I hear from your podcast and what I've read about you. So I'm really excited to talk to you.
That's awesome. I guess maybe we're spirit animals.
I think so.
That's awesome. So let's find out how similar we are. I want to know all about you. So let's start from the beginning to get an idea of your money story. How did money kind of play a role in your life growing up, and how did it kind of lead you to eventually become a money coach?
Sure. Well, I think it started really early on. I grew up in a household where there was always seemed to be a lack of. So I grew up, I wasn't the teenager or even at 10 years old when you would ask for your mom or dad, can you give me $10 or $5 or whatever it is. I wasn't that kid because they were always, I had already heard over and over again that we don't have the money. We can't afford this. So for me, logically, it made sense not to ask because I already knew the answer. So it really allowed me to be super independent. And it's crazy to think that at 10 years old, I was babysitting newborns. Even when my child was 10 years old, I didn't even want to babysit at that time. But so it's just crazy. So that's how I earned money to get some of the things that I wanted because for me, since my parents had always said, we can't afford this, we don't have the money, it didn't make sense for me to ask them for money. So it really just made me super independent. So I appreciate that. But I knew early on, and as I graduated from high school, that I didn't want that to be thinking that way. But fast forward, it did affect me because I became this hoarder of money. I was a really good saver, really good saver.
Yeah, that does sound like me. I'm a money hoarder.
But I didn't want to spend. I didn't enjoy it. And so then I met my husband. And he's a complete opposite. It's just crazy to think how it just how you can find a partner in life and it just balances you out. I have yet to find people that are exactly the same as far as, spender or a saver.
So is he more of a spender and you're more of a saver?
Yes.
Just like me and my husband, for sure.
Yeah, so
it's a good balance, though. It is.
Yeah, it's just crazy to think that how it balances out so well. But he really taught me the importance of enjoying life and really how we go to work to make money. So
yeah,
why not enjoy it? So really kind of that's when I met him and we started dating. It really hit me how that mentality that I grew up with affected me. And so it was that, then we got married. And so it was the shift of learning each other's money stories, money habits, all that good stuff. So that really helped me out. It just grounded me from, yes, I could still continue to save money, but it was okay to spend it. I didn't have to feel guilty of spending it. So my husband really grounded me with that. And really how I became a money coach. We're a military family. So we've moved, I'm not even going to count, but I want to say between 8 and 9 times in the almost 16 years of marriage. And, it's not for a pity party or anything because I love my life. Yeah. And it's just an adventure. I wouldn't change it for the world. But I needed to find something that I could take with me with every move. I didn't want to move in a lot, especially as spouses. He could, obviously his job continues, but my job would not. So it would be starting over and it might not be the same in the same career path that I had. So I knew I had to find something and do something that I could take. And when we first got married, we had made a decision as a couple that when we had kids, it was very important for both of us that I stay home. So I would leave my job once we started having kids, just because one, he happens to be gone all the time. Yeah. And two, me growing up, I was a latch-key kid. So I'm dating myself, but latch-key kids back then, I'm not a millennial. You and I established that. There were the kids that, even 10 years old, 9 years old, they would come home and their parents would be working. So they would have the key around their neck. So hence the latchkey kid. And I didn't want that for my child. I wanted at least, me to be there, me to be able to go on the field trips, be volunteer as a mom. I didn't have that. And that was something that affected me. So that was also important to me. And so I was able to, we were able to go from the 2 incomes to 1 successfully. And had a lot of questions of like, what were we doing? Because we still had the debt, student loans on for my husband. And it just somehow I wish I had tracked, because I could really have this great, phenomenal story of what I did, but I didn't really track it. I have to really think through it. But I was able to manage the money well, save money, just get everything together. And so I had a lot of questions of how I did it, or actually a lot of questions too, is how I can help people. Yeah. So that started it, of how I knew that was something that I was good at and that I could help people. But I didn't go into this 2 years later, because, I was just, in between having kids and then the moves, it just doesn't happen.
Well, yeah, like even though you're working for yourself and working from home, you're still working and raising a family and doing all of that stuff. Like that's a lot of work.
It is a lot of work. So years later, my husband got an email about this opportunity for military spouses it was called the Military Spouse Fellowship. So that really kickstarted the whole thing, because I'm like, oh, this is, this would work perfectly. I can go through, get this accreditation. It's called the AFC, Accredited Financial Counselor, through an organization called AFCPE. So I got the fellowship, went through the program, and that's what kickstarted it. But I noticed being when I say a financial counselor, the term that is really most known is a certified financial planner, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So, but when you talk, I'm a financial counselor, people don't know what that is because it is a fairly new organization in terms of like, I don't know, the past 10 years or so or 20 years. And so I needed to find a different term for me because people would always assume I was a financial planner, which I am not. I'm not able to give you that guidance on investing and long-term planning, but I can most definitely get your finances, help you get your finances in shape so you can do those things.
Which is kind of what a financial planner doesn't really do. Like I have a financial planner and he didn't tell me how to budget,
right.
to figure that out on my own.
Right. Some financial planners definitely do. So I basically do the I get people ready for that, to be able to work, if you want to look at it that way. It's the pre-financial planner phase. In a sense. So that's basically how I got to be, to this stage of doing, I call myself a motivational money coach just because I like to motivate. It's not just about telling you what to do because I don't tell you what to do. We talk about what you want to accomplish and let that guide us. But because I so strongly feel personal finance is so personal, we each have different aspirations, and it's really about digging deep and getting clear as to what you want in life versus what people, the quote unquote money experts, say you should be doing.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Because, they talk about getting out of debt, you obviously, yes, you don't have debt for the rest of your life and you want to be saving. But I really strongly feel that if you're clear, like what that is going to be doing for you. So instead of, well, I want to get out of debt, so I have this, this extra money. What are you going to do with that money? It's really getting behind the why and why it's important. And that's going to motivate you. So I help people get clear on that so they can make progress versus get stuck at a certain point of not continuing to save or paying off debt.
Exactly. And I think that's something that lots of people forget. They get so hung up on the how do I do this? How do I do this? And they don't really sit and take a minute to think about the why. And even I have to do that. And I talk about money and think about money all the time, but I still have to sometimes be like, whoa. Why am I doing this? Or why do I want this? Or what are my goals? It's important to kind of reassess and really just refocus. I feel like sometimes in our daily lives, we get so focused on the day to day and we kind of forget about the big picture things, which is, kind of the point of our lives, right?
Absolutely.
So what I'm curious about, since you are a military family and you said that you've moved 8 or 9 times, throughout these 16 years, and this, is a testament to how good you are with your money. How do you do that? That seems like a very expensive thing to move constantly and set up your life every couple of years.
Yes, it is. It can be expensive. With the military, they do help you move financially, right? So they do pay for your move. There's definitely certain stipulations, the amount of weight you can move and all that good stuff. So there's certain things that are covered per se, right? But there's other things that are involved in the move that aren't covered. So for example, in a move, there are certain things that the packers won't take. Like, for example, your cleaning supplies, because they're hazardous. They could cause a fire and things that make sense, right? So maybe you had just bought, so you have to really plan like months ahead of time before your move, so you're not stuck with either throwing away cleaning supplies or giving them away or just leaving them in wherever the apartment or the house or wherever you're living. So it's those type of things that you have to plan ahead. Obviously, the food, especially if you buy a lot of frozen, if you stock up on chicken and meat in the freezer, you have to plan months in ahead that you're not going to have those. So that can get expensive. And then when you move, it's a different cost of living. So it fluctuates. So you have to think about that because your income is not going to it's going to stay the same. Their income stays the same. And so that's another, schools, finding the schools, or getting to the new house, and the house is a different size, and maybe you need something else, and the furniture, and there's so many different things that you don't think about in a typical move, because people don't do it as often. But even though they help us, but there's other costs involved. The transition. In the transition, you're in a hotel. They cover up to a certain point, but then you're eating out. That's a cost.
Yeah.
Those type of things. There's just a lot of detail.
Yeah, but I guess you've kind of got it down since you've done it so many times. You probably have a pretty good strategy.
Sometimes I think so, but then there's surprises.
Yeah.
There's always a surprise.
That's very true. One thing I did want to also talk to you about is what I really love about you is you are very passionate about helping people, but specifically helping women with their money, which I think is so great, because I feel like for so many years it was the kind of the man in the relationship or the in the family that was the person that took responsibility for all of the finances. And I remember that was one of the first financial books I read. It talked about how this book, it was probably an old book that I read that they even talked about this, but they talked about how as a woman, you should know just as much as your male partner, because what if he dies and you don't know what your finances are, where are they, and how to handle them.
Exactly.
And so that's why I think that's so awesome that you are really focusing on helping women specifically.
Yes, I think it's very, very important too. I mean, one of the reasons I do is, one, I can speak speak women language, if you will, and how, money doesn't, by all means, it doesn't discriminate, but how we view money is different how men view money. So we value different things. We are focused more on, we're nurturers, so we're focused more on the day-to-day things and balancing things. Men are more focused on, let's say, getting that home, right? And because they're the quote-unquote breadwinners, the retirement, they're more long-term thinkers. We're about the day-to-day and just taking care, nurturing our family. So it's just, I think it's really important for different things. You already mentioned, if there's, I don't know if you mentioned a divorce or death, you have to be in the know. Yeah. Because something happens and you don't know how, like you mentioned, how are you going to take care of your finances? And there's different, nowadays there's definitely a lot of women being the money managers, but even though in those situations, the man should be in the know for those same reasons.
Exactly.
For that, there's also, because you have to have those money conversations, especially in a marriage. Money is one of the top reasons for divorce, right? So you need to be able to speak that conversation. And if you're both in the know, you can make better money decisions. That's also, I think, huge for me.
And avoid arguments. I remember growing up, my parents did argue about money, just like, oh, you spent this or whatever. And I always wanted to make sure that when I, grew up and was in a relationship, I didn't want to have those. I'd want to have conversations and less arguments. And so, me being a personal finance blogger and podcaster, obviously that's something I'm going to talk about with my husband. And so even though it's not necessarily his favorite topic, I think I've over the years worn him down. Now he actually doesn't mind talking about it. And the thing is, it's good because we're always on the same page. We're working towards the same goals. So we're both, saving and investing, and we're doing it as a team, which helps us not argue about money because we know where we're at. And I think that's the key thing to remember is if there's open conversation, there's nothing to argue about if you're on the same page.
Absolutely. And I think some other things to consider why women should be in the know of money is, especially when we have kids, us moms, our kids are watching. It is just amazing. I've seen time and time and again the example that we are our kids and how they really do some of the things. And obviously, if you're cursing, they repeat some of those curse words at this, the most inappropriate moment sometimes. But they're watching that example and really how you view money, your relationship with money, your attitude with money. And you can set the tone for their future by, if you're talking all the time about, oh, we can't afford this. Like in my situation, it set the tone and it did affect me. And then obviously it wasn't a bad intention. My parents were great parents. They did their very best in raising us, but it does affect the kids. So you just really have to be very present and know what kind of example you're setting the kid, setting your child. And if you're in the know of money and you're confident, they're going to have that same thing. They're going to have the desire to want to know more about finances and be, savvy with their finances. So I think that's another reason, for being in the know. And also women, I'm sure you've seen the same thing. There's a lot of guilt.
Yep.
A lot of guilt when we treat ourselves. But if we're in the know and we're clear, really it boils down to clarity and getting clear on where that money is going. So if you know exactly where that money is going, what's coming in and what's going out, that guilt is going to really drastically, it's going to go down.
It's not going to go away, but it'll go down.
It'll go down for sure, because well, if you know there's some money left over, well, it's okay to spend it and you're not going to feel as guilty.
Absolutely. Now I want to kind of ask you because you are a money coach and you deal with a lot of people with lots of different experiences and backgrounds. I have a couple questions where I want to hear some of your advice on what someone should do. So the first one would be what's a best practice when it comes to curbing impulse spending? We all do it, but what kind of suggestions would you have to kind of walk the other way and put away that credit card?
Well, with impulse spending, there's no 100% remedy for it, in my opinion. There's just the big thing that I suggest to people is to budget it in. So if you know you have a habit, like mine's coffee, so Starbucks, if you know you have some sort of habit or just whatever, you need to get clear as to about how much are you spending a month and see how that fits in your budget, right? And that's really, I think the best thing to do is to budget it in. Also just get clear on if you're going to, let's say, I don't know, you're going to do a shop for whatever reason, you get this impulse to go on a shopping spree. And you have to look at that amount that you're going to spend prior to, if you have an idea before you do it. Sometimes we just kind of go ahead and do it, is have an idea how much you make per hour, get your dollar figure per hour, and see how many hours are you going to be working. And that helps, right?
That's very helpful.
Yeah. So, I think those type of things, again, there's no 100% remedy, but if you also are clear as to, if you kind of dig deep as to, okay, why do you, like for me, coffee, like Starbucks, there's Starbucks all over the place here, seems like around every corner. And I always claim my car drives me there and puts it in my hand. But you have to get clear. It's like, why do you do that? Maybe sometimes in the month I'm just stressed and I just want that sugary drink, right? So you have to kind of dig deep as to, okay, why is it that I'm doing this? And get clarity around that.
So basically have your money front of mind all the time, which I think is hard to do, but super important to do.
Yes.
Yes. Now, I want to kind of talk a little bit about debt. Most people are in debt. Most of the people that I know have student loans or credit card debt or some kind of debt. And we all, at some point in our lives realize we need to fix this situation. We need to get out of it. What are some of your tips for trying to, make a strategy to pay off your debt and not get sidetracked and, continue so you reach that goal.
Right. There are definitely a lot of different tools that you can use. But I think, firstly, I talk about this all the time, is getting clear on your income, your expenses, what discretionary income or leftover income you have. And you can use there's a tool that I always, it's not like a robust, pretty tool, but it does its job and it's free. It's called Powerpay.org. And you just go in there, you put all your debt, your total debt, your interest rate, your minimum payment, and then you can play around with it in the sense of if you know you have, let's say, an extra $100 a month, you put that as an extra payment for every month, and it'll tell you how, with doing that every single month, how long it's going to take you to pay that debt off.
Oh,
so it'll tell you the month and the year of when you'll be done. And that is a huge one. I use it with my one-on-one clients. It's a huge motivator because they see like the power of that extra $100. And so they try to find other ways that they could minimize their spending and so that tool is just a fantastic tool to do so. And just really getting clear on your why is also important. That's what's going to motivate you and what is going to drive you to continue automating those extra payments. So that way you don't have to worry about it. Treat that like another bill. There's different, those are really the main things that you can do. And also just I know there's a lot of great stories out there of, I paid $60,000 of debt in I've interviewed some stories, and they're meant for inspiration, right? They're meant
but sometimes they can be like, how can I, like they're almost so crazy that it's like, but I don't know if I could do that, so I'm not even going to try. Right. It can be unmotivating a little bit at the same time. Right.
So, I mean, take those as inspiration. If it bothers you, don't listen to those stories. Just know that you're going to get there. And it doesn't matter if you get there in 5 years, 10 years, or 6 months. The point is, once you've paid off debt, you paid off debt. And that's something to celebrate about. Doesn't matter.
Absolutely. It's a success story once you've paid off the debt. Doesn't matter how long it takes you, as long as you reach that finish line. And I think that's, just like you said, there's so many stories out there, just because they are, it looks good in a newspaper or online or whatever about someone paying off their debt in a short amount of time. And that's great. But for kind of regular folk like us, sometimes it's like, well, I can't do that because I only make this or have these expenses and whatnot. So I think the key thing to remember is just set a deadline for you, what works for you, and just keep at it.
Right, because I did actually a podcast episode on this, and I shared my story. It didn't take us, and it didn't take us 6 months or 10 months or whatever. We paid off student loan debt in maybe 15 years. But but here's the thing. Even though it took us 15 years, that might seem a lot to some people. What did we do? We had made big purchases as well that we didn't accumulate it. So we may have been paying that debt off slower, but we also prevented debt.
Yes,
right? Because we had to, so we had to make these purchases, but we were smart enough that we weren't going to get into more debt, right? So it's just all about perspective as well,
Absolutely.
I think.
Now, my kind of last one to you, and this kind of does tie into the last topic, but how do you suggest someone can stick to their budget like a pro? I have a very hard time doing to this, and I'm embarrassed to say that because I do talk about personal finance and how to be good with your money all the time, but I have a budget, and sometimes I find it very tricky to stick to it to the dime. I was really good when I first started, when I first moved out of my house and had no money, probably because I didn't have any option. I really needed to stick to that budget. Otherwise I was going to eat ramen noodles. But for me, I feel like as I get older, I just kind kind of try to do different things, but I'd love to know what your kind of tips to sticking to a budget would be.
Right. Well, you have to definitely find a system that works for you. So if you're not a spreadsheet type of person, don't use a spreadsheet. Maybe you're more of a software type of person. So you really have to find that tool that you will definitely use. You also have to be flexible with yourself, because I don't stick to my budget all the time either. It just happens. And also just put a system in place. For example, has been a process of over the years. This didn't happen overnight, and it has worked out fantastic for us. And I don't claim to come up with this, because I know each time when I think I have this genius idea, I find out other people have already been doing it, right?
Yeah.
So I don't claim to post, but I use cash has not been a system that has worked well for me. The cash envelope system just didn't do it for me, because I felt that was harder to track, because then I had to look at the receipts and then figure out what was what, and that I like simplicity. But what has worked well for me is a virtual envelope system. So I have set up, especially in the world of online banking, it makes it so much easier. I don't have the typical just one checking and one savings account. I take a look at where our needs are. And so I have one account where it's just for the bills. So the income goes in there and just the bills go out of there. But from there, I transfer money to some separate accounts. So for example, I have one where our daily spending, so our groceries, and that just makes, since we already have a budget, we already know how much is going to go in there. And from there, it's so much easier to track, because what happens when we had it all in one, if we overspent in the groceries, well, it touched the money for, let's say, the electricity account, right?
Yeah.
So it just separating that money. You don't have to go all crazy. I have multiple accounts, because
I am actually thinking, I'm like, oh my gosh, I think I should do that, because right now I have a similar system, except right now we have a joint account that has, we both put a certain amount of money in there to pay off all our bills, and then we have lots of our bills that just take money out of that account or whatever. But we don't have a separate system or a separate account for groceries specifically, or some others, like it's all kind of in one pot, and I think that does make it a bit more confusing. So I think I'm going to steal your idea.
Well, you're not stealing my idea, because I'm sure others have done the same.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
I actually saw a article, because I had done a webinar about this last year. And then, of course, a couple weeks later, I knew, because already in my mind, I'm like, I know there's other people that's got to do this, right? And sure enough, a couple weeks later, there was an article about a similar system. She had it a little bit different, but I separate like our travel money every month. I separate like those non-monthly bills, those quarterly bills, our trash, our water, those type of things. I separate, so when those bills come due, I just dip in that account and pay them.
I like that.
So it just makes things easier to track as well.
Absolutely. That's awesome. Super valuable information. I'm honestly a super nerd right now, because I'm actually kind of excited to go and redo my budget. But I wanted to, because your website is awesome, and your podcast, like you mentioned, is also a great resource. But you have a couple resources that I want to give you an opportunity to share with listeners that I think are super helpful. First, your Facebook group, which I think is great.
Oh, thank you. Yes. So my Facebook group, you just can go to jenhemphill.com/community. And it's just all taking the conversation from the podcast in the group. And we don't just talk about podcasts. It's a great group of women. We talk about all sorts of different things. It's not just even money related. But the beautiful thing in the group is that the ladies feel comfortable talking about money, because money can be such a taboo subject. So that is just such a beautiful thing to see when they start off the conversation and ask questions or support each other, so that is just amazing.
Absolutely. That's awesome. And I think you also had a checklist or something. When I went on, there's a pop-up for it. I'm like, ooh, I'm going to grab that.
Oh, well, I have several things. So I have a what I call the Jumpstart Your Money Mini Guide. And that is really, actually, I also take you through it with a podcast episode. So it's just the pre-budgeting step, I call it. So it's the getting clear as to where your money is going. So I just take you through some simple steps of just taking the overwhelm. Because when I talk to clients, they're just like, I don't even want to look at it. They're afraid. So I just try to take a step back and minimize that overwhelm. And I help you through that. It's a worksheet along that you can do with a podcast episode.
Awesome.
As well.
Awesome. Fabulous. Well, thank you so much for chatting with me.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's been so much fun.
And that was episode 48 of the Mo Money podcast. Make sure to check out the show notes for this episode at jessicamorehouse.com/48. And of course, check out Jen's fabulous website where she has more resources, blog posts, podcast episodes, everything at jenhemphill.com. And I'll, of course, include links to some of the things that we talked about in the show notes at jessicamorehouse.com/48. And before I go, I just want to do a couple iTunes reviews shout outs because there's some awesome people out there, people like you who are listening, who spend some extra time to send me an iTunes review. And I feel so thankful that they do that. If you haven't done that, please make sure to do that. It really helps me out. It helps me kind of bump up in those iTunes charts so other people can find me and hopefully learn something from one of my episodes. So let's jump into the first one. This one is from FranCont89 from Canada. Great job, Jessica. This is a great podcast. Keep up the good work. I'm looking forward to your new episodes. All your guests are superb. Well, thank you so much. And on to some reviews from my American friends. This one is from Drew Kleiner, and he says, this podcast has been very insightful to the world of personal finance. It's like listening to your best friend have an interesting and fun conversation about money at a coffee shop. Jessica's stories and guests have helped push me to get a side job to help pay down debt, and I'm so happy to say I've never been in a better financial position. Thank you, Jessica. Oh my gosh, that's awesome. I'm so happy that you're doing so well, and this podcast has helped you get there. That's super cool. And another one is from MCAT89. Thank you for sharing your insights and being a woman talking about personal finance. I often play your podcast while driving my daughters around town so they hear a voice they can identify with talking about personal finance. Oh my gosh, you just made my day. That is the best thing I've ever heard. That is so cool. Thank you so much for leaving me that review. And if you're listening and you haven't sent me a review yet, please do. It's super easy. I'll even put some instructions in the show notes if you need a little,